Have you ever felt like God was silent, only to realize He was whispering the whole time? In this powerful message, discover how to hear His voice in the quiet and chaos time. In the moments you least expect, God speaks. When God whispers, will open your heart to the gentle, life-changing voice of God that speaks not in thunder, but in stillness. 1. The whisper that shook a prophet, Elijah's encounter with God in a cave. 1 Kings 19:12. And after the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire, and after the fire, a still small voice. Elijah expected God to show up in fire, wind, and earthquake. But the Almighty came as a whisper. It wasn't weakness, but intimacy. The silence wasn't absence, it was presence. In your wilderness, God may bypass the dramatic and speak quietly to your heart. That whisper can rebuild what storms have broken. 2. Heaven's bread and holy silence. How God speaks through daily. Manna. Exodus 16:14-15. When the dew was gone, thin flakes like frost on the ground appeared. It is manna, the bread the Lord has given you to eat. In the barren wasteland, God whispered through provision. No thunder, no lightning, just quiet bread on the ground each morning. It was God's way of saying, I see you, I sustain you. In your dry season, God's whisper may look like just enough strength, just enough peace, just enough grace to get through today. The deserted mother. God didn't forget. Hagar hears the whisper. Genesis 21:17. God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar, do not be afraid. Alone in the wilderness, abandoned and afraid, Hagar thought her story was over. But God heard a child's cry and whispered hope. He opened her eyes to water that was there all along. When you're at your lowest, that's when God often draws nearest, not with noise, but with tender whispers of rescue. 4. Jesus faced the devil with a whisper when truth spoke louder than temptation. Matthew 4:1-4. Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness. Man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. Jesus, hungry and alone, didn't fight the enemy with noise. He fought with whispered scripture. In your wilderness of temptation, identity crisis, or exhaustion, it's not always thunder that saves you. It's truth spoken quietly, but with power. The devil can't handle a heart anchored in the Word. 5. A burning bush and a broken man. When God called Moses in the wilderness, Exodus 3:2-4. The bush was on fire, but it did not burn up. God called to him from within the bush. Moses had failed, fled, and faded into obscurity. But the wilderness became the place where God whispered destiny through a bush that didn't burn out. God's whispers often come when you feel least useful. He uses the wilderness not to punish, but to prepare you for calling you never imagined. 6. God's whisper in the wasteland, the promise, hidden in the dry season. Isaiah 43:19. See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I am making a way in the wilderness. The wilderness looks empty, but God speaks there of things that haven't happened yet. He whispers about rivers in deserts, paths through nowhere, and new beginnings in dead ends. If you listen close, you'll hear the future rustling beneath your feet. The silence isn't sterile. It's sacred space for transformation. 7. When God uses the wilderness to make you a voice. John 1:23. I am the voice of one calling in the wilderness. Make straight the way for the Lord. John the Baptist didn't preach from a palace. His pulpit was the wilderness. God turned his isolation into influence. Your wilderness could be the stage where your voice is refined, your purpose made clear, and your soul set on fire. When God whispers to you there, it's often to echo through others later. 8. When worship echoes from the caves, David's songs from the shadows. Psalm 57, verse 1 to 2. I will take refuge in the shadow of your wings until the disaster has passed. I cry out to God, Most High. David didn't write psalms in peaceful gardens, but in dark, damp caves while hunted. The wilderness stripped him of distractions, and what was left was worship. God whispered comfort through chaos. If you're hiding, hurting, or holding on, know this. Some of the most powerful praise begins in broken places. 9. Dead places still hear God. The whisper that raised dry bones. Ezekiel 37, 4-5. Prophesy to these bones and say to them, Dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. I will make breath enter you, and you will come to life. The valley of dry bones was beyond hope, but God told Ezekiel to speak, and his breath turned lifelessness into an army. Sometimes the wilderness feels like death, but it's the perfect place for resurrection. One whisper from God can awaken what you thought was gone forever. 10. Jesus withdrew and found strength. The power of solitude and the whisper of the Father. Luke 5:16. But Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. Even Jesus needed to retreat, not to escape, but to connect. In lonely places, the noise fades, and the Father's whisper becomes clear. Solitude isn't a curse, it's a strategy. The wilderness may feel isolating, but it's where intimacy with God is forged, and fresh strength is born.